In this video, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the commercial AccelQ tool. This is a visual modeling and domain-specific language tool for helping teams with automated execution. I'm going to show you the visual modeling aspects, how we create diagrams to drive our execution, how you create scenarios, test cases, how to build your own domain-specific language, and reuse the actions that you're creating in the tool to support the execution. I'm going to use the web application To Do MVC as the application under test. And this is a sponsored video because AccelQ have paid for my time. They haven't told me what to say. This is an independent overview of their tool, and you can find it at accelq.com. So let's have a quick look at the app itself. So this is the AccelQ tool. This is the main universe view, and you can see it's a diagram. This is a SaaS system, software as a service, so it's hosted on a cloud platform. When I execute the tests, they will connect to an agent on my machine and run the tests locally. There's also a Chrome plugin that we use to capture views and then use to create the elements which we'll use in the automated execution. So I'm going to show you the universe first. AccelQ has a number of modeling abstraction layers to help us build the automated execution scripts. So the first is the universe, which is a diagrammatic view of the context of our application. So you can see here I've modeled To Do MVC as essentially starting the app, the top level part of the To Do MVC app, all the to-dos, and the filters. So in To Do MVC, I've got the top level part where I create to-dos. Then I've got the rows of to-dos, then I've got all the filters down here, and that's what I've modeled in AccelQ. And it's a graph. So you might look at this and think, well, this is a state model, and it probably could be, but it's more generic than that. It's a diagram showing flows through contexts and how we move from one to the other. And this is important because when we look at the scenarios, when I hover over these, I can see what paths each of these scenarios covers in my model, so I can get a feel for what I'm doing in each one of these particular scenarios. And this is used to, each of these nodes is used to help me organize the elements and decide which actions are applicable at each point in time. If we had an app with a login page, the login page might well be a context, and then when you've logged in, it takes you to a main dashboard. So this is a high-level modeling tool. You gradually build up your model of the application, and then when you create scenarios, the scenarios are lists of actions, and they represent paths through this model. Then each of the scenarios can have data, which is represented in test cases. So we've got multiple abstraction layers as we go through here. So next thing we want to understand is the concept of a context, and the context is just a logical part of the application. So one part of the application that I've got here is the To Do MVC create panel. So in order to understand the context, let's first of all look at the To Do MVC application so you can see how I've split it up. So in the To Do MVC application, we've got the top part of the application with the input field and a select all. And I've got the to-do list, and I've got the item count and all the filters. And I've modeled that over here in AccelQ as the To Do MVC create panel, which is the top part, the rows of to-dos, and the filters. So I've logically split this single page app into multiple parts. So I'm modeling components on the page essentially as contexts in AccelQ. Now when I'm automating an application, I need to think about at least two things. What scenarios do I want to cover? Like, what am I aiming to achieve with this automating? And what capabilities do I need to have to enable that? i.e., what actions can I take? With To Do MVC, the capabilities are creating a to-do, amending a to-do. So I double click, amend a to-do, changing the state of a to-do, filtering the to-dos, deleting a to-do, and asserting on the counts that are here. Those are the basic actions that I need to create, and each of those actions is associated with a context in AccelQ. So let's have a look at how we would create a to-do. So I've split the To Do MVC app into three contexts. Create is going to be in the create panel context. So if I click on the details here, we can see that I've got three views different parts of the create application in different states. Now these views are used to create the elements. If I click on one of these views here, I recorded this with a whole bunch of data on it, but what I'm really interested in is this. And you can see as I hover over this, AccelQ is showing me the different identifications for these elements. And the top one, it's recognized that we have already turned this into an element. So let's have a look at this. This is the create to do name input. That's what I've called it. And you can see here that AccelQ gives me the ability to have multiple locators if I want to identify this, so that if the application changes, it will first of all try the class. If the class isn't there, it will try the placeholder to try and make the execution more robust in the face of changes in the application. I've got this set to just the class. I can see how many it's matching. I can change different parts here, cancel that. If I really want to, I can go into the advanced, and then I can use specific CSS selectors, jQuery selectors, or XPath. But most of the time you're not going to need to do that. I've created custom ones because I was experimenting with the tool, but the create to do name input has just been picked up with the standard functionality out of AccelQ. And I've used this element in an action, the create to do action. So let me have a look at the actions. And in here we'll see a create a to do action. Now this is using an English-like domain-specific language. Up here, if I wanted to click on something, I can say just click. We can see the kind of suggestions for what I might want to do. I'll create click. Then it's given me a list of all the elements I've identified. So I would say create to do name input, and then I've clicked on that element. So I'm not having to write code at this point. I'm using a kind of code completion aspect here for a domain-specific language. And any of the actions that we create are reusable in other actions. So we can build up our own domain-specific language. Let me delete that. Yes. So this is quite simple. This says click on an element that I identified in the context. This says enter a value into that field. And this value could be a literal, a string literal, an actual value, a parameter that I'm passing into this action, something that I've set globally, so it might be the URL, the site URL, some common data for everything, or a local parameter, something defined inside this script itself. This to-do name is being passed in to this action from the scenario execution. So now I'll explain scenarios, because I have an action, create a to-do. I could use that in a scenario. So let me find a scenario where this is used. If I go back to Navigator, click on scenarios, let's have a look at create and delete. So create and delete is a scenario, which is a set of steps which are going through the universe diagram. So first of all, I visit the to-do MVC site, I create a to-do, then I want to work with the actual rows of to-dos because I'm going to validate that the list count is what I expect. Then I'm going to delete a to-do, which is an action. Then I'm going to validate the number again and check that it's 0. And that's the basic flow. A scenario is a flow through the universe. Then to instantiate it with data, I create test cases. I can instantiate data at this level, and that creates an invariant data for all the test cases that pass through that scenario. In test case itself, I've got create and delete a to-do here. Let me click on this and edit it. And you can see that it's only showing me the steps that have got parameters. So I need to tell it, when you create a to-do, what should we pass in as a parameter? So I'm going to say create to-do. So this will create a to-do called create to-do. Then validate that the number of to-dos shown is 1. Then I'm going to delete the first item in the list, so then I should see 0 as the numbers. So this is a very simple way of modeling a flow through the universe and having different test cases, different sets of data that go across it. So we've got a data-driven modeling part to this tool as well. So I guess it's time to run it. So I got a terminal up here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the agent. So the agent runs under Java 1.8, so I'm exporting Java Home to be 1.8. Start the agent up. The agent will then connect to the AccelQ servers for me so that the server can start sending requests down to my local machine. and there it's ready to run. So I can now click on run, and this will allow me to run this scenario. So I've got one test case here. If I had more test cases, I could choose them. So I'm going to choose the create and delete a to-do test case. I'm going to set this to comprehensive execution, so it'll create quite a lot of screenshots. I'm going to run it on the UT1 environment, which I've set up to be the vanilla JS. And this is a global variable essentially, so I'll just run that now. Click here to track progress. So in the terminal now, you can see that some information is being sent down to my machine. And what AccelQ has done is it's generated code and it's sending it down to my machine. It's building that code and then running it. And it's going to run Selenium WebDriver on my machine to actually control Chrome and run my create and delete test against the to-do MVC app. So the first thing it will do is it will start up the app, then it will create a to-do using the parameter that we passed in, create to-do, and then it will hover over it, click the button and delete it. And as it went through there, it checked the number of to-dos shown at the bottom. So this is just finishing up, and we'll have a look in AccelQ at the report that it's created. The easiest way for me to get to the report is to click on the little screenshot icon here, and we can see all the different steps and what was happening when the test was executing. So had anything gone wrong, I would see in the screenshots what kind of state the application was in. Let's have a look at the delete. So it's showing me there was a to-do, hovered over it, the X came, we clicked on the X. So I can get a good feel for how this particular scenario ran. If I want to, I can view the entire script execution in one view. So I'm not going to show you everything that I've done in the tool, but if I have a look at the actions that I've created, you can see that in terms of capabilities, I've automated most of the to-do MVC capabilities. So I can create a to-do, I can amend a to-do, I can actually open the to-do MVC site, I can use the filters, I can filter a completed, toggle to-do, I can clear the completed, I can delete a specific to-do. I've got some validation actions which check the counts. So using this, I can automate pretty much most of, I think all of, the to-do MVC functionality, which is why I've created some scenarios up here to create and delete, and create multiple to-dos. So if I was trying to set up test data in the environment, that might work. Create and amend, create filters. So I'll just have a quick look at some of these actions and you can see those in more detail. So you've seen the create to-do, that was very simple. Let's have a look at amend. So amend is basically saying, I want you to find an item in the to-do items. And again, these are elements in the context. Double click on one of them, have a synchronization, wait for the input field that appears to be enabled, then enter a new value, hit the enter key, then check that the item exists, and then double check that the text was changed. Now, I might decide if I was modeling this again, not to put the verification item in the step, but this seems fine for me at the moment because every amend I'm expecting to change the value, so that's good enough for me. And again, there's no program code in here. This is all using the domain-specific language. I'm going to have a quick look at the create to-do items given a limit. Here we go. I'm picking this one because we're not using programming languages here, but we do have the ability to loop over items. And you can see that I'm reusing the create a to-do action that you saw earlier on. So I'm building up a domain-specific language unique to the application that I'm testing, which I can reuse in other actions. So this action, create to-do items given a limit, takes a parameter, which is an input that says how many do you want to create, and then it will create that many to-dos. So I might use that for setting up test data for a particular scenario, then deleting some of those items or amending some of them, or to help me test the filters a little bit better. But we can do loops, we can do ifs. So let's find an action that has an if statement. So the validate will have an if statement. And the reason validate has an if statement is because sometimes the number is not displayed. So I don't want to check the number if it isn't there. And the if statement here allows me to do that. Chances are most of the actions that you're going to have are going to be simple paths through doing this particular set of functionality, and you chain them in scenarios to do the work. So the next main concept to look at, and I think it's probably the last big concept, is the test suites. So test suites are what we would use if we were running this in continuous integration, or we wanted to run a whole bunch of tests at the same time. So here I have a scenario called all scenarios, which is static, which means I chose which scenarios to put in there. I could have had it as a filtered scenario, and then it would dynamically update as I add more scenarios into the system. They might all be tagged in a certain way, and I could include all the scenarios for a certain tag. But I can run scenarios just as easy as I can specific test cases. So let me just do that. So I don't want to run the scenario, I want to run the test suite, and I want to run the all scenarios. Let's put it on comprehensive, and let's run that. So that will just run as I'm talking, because I haven't explored all the functionality of this tool. What I have got are repeatable test suites. I've got data-driven tests. I've used built-up building blocks to allow me to model the to-do MVC application. I've got create, read, and update and delete flows to test most of the to-do MVC paths. I've got parameterized actions so that I can reuse them with specific parameters. I've got nested actions, so I'm reusing the actions as domain-specific words in other actions. I've got global configuration, so I can switch this to a different version of to-do MVC and run the test against that. AccelQ has got an interesting and fairly rich set of modeling concepts to explore. So you can model the high-level domain model of your application in terms of its flows. You've got an abstraction level for the actions to build up actions and work with those. There's parameters in there. Now, it doesn't require programming language knowledge to operate. Right? The domain-specific language that we're using is fairly easy to pick up. It's English language. There's a code completion helper, so you just type in what you want, it shows. There's a lot of documentation on the site to help you work through it. If you do have more understanding of programming, then you can, using the user libraries, upload your own code. If you know how to do CSS selectors, then you can change the CSS selectors and put complicated CSS selectors in there if you want to. So this is a strategic level automated execution tool with multiple abstraction processes to help teams with no or very little programming knowledge to automate applications. And if you do have programming knowledge, you can augment the tool with your own scripts and your own CSS to help you move forward. So that's just a quick overview of the AccelQ tool, and you can find it at accelq.com.